Bam.
Hi, Erik. This is Erik Kleinsmith, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Here's the best thing ever is I didn't have to coach Erik to see that. I say that before every show. I'm like, Erik knows what to do, and he knew what to do, and I love this.
How do you get rid of this guy? He keeps coming back.
I love it, man. I love it that we get to do this. I love it that, in part because of the relationship that we've, rekindled after the mid '90s, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
That I'm now talking to a bunch of people from the 165th and getting counterintelligence agents to come onto the show, and I think it's great that all this stuff has happened in part because we've reconnected.
Honestly, that's my favorite part of all your guests is watching old buds, and quite honestly, I haven't seen you guys in person for over 25 years.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I got to get my butt out to LA to hang out with you, or gosh, even some other places where I know Holtzclaw and Barraclaw and Lisa Olson, Gina, and all those folks. I did catch up with Joe Garland, and we did have lunch together a little while ago. So there's a couple guys here in town that I still game with, Keith Wittenbach, Todd Traha, but other than that, it's everybody gets busy.
Everybody gets busy. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you back on. We're not here to talk about counterintelligence stuff today. Today we're talking about the latest breaking news in the Zodiac Killer case. Let's not bury the lead anymore. And so let's talk about where it is today now that we're able to talk about it again.
Sure. I mean, and I think that when we broke the story, it was October 6th of 2021. And I came on your show here. The only reason I know that specifically because I was let go from my previous employer on October 5th, so the day before. So you might look at my face there. Behind my smile and calm is somebody was working in a panic to try to see what was going on with his life and that kind of thing. But everything worked out, and great company I work for now. It's fantastic and good to go. But since that time for our cold case team, we have now been getting into what's, what I would call the more and more diving into the nitty gritty about the case. And so when we talked earlier, we went over some of the pieces of evidence that we've assembled. And there's lots of key indicators. And quite frankly, like I said before, is like we've yet to run into a significant disqualifier for the guy that we feel is the Zodiac Killer, Gary Francis Poste. And so we've done obviously matches by he was in the area, and we've seen proof that he was in the area for various killings. And this, again, when you're up in the central area of California, Modesto, Groveland, Vallejo area, you're prime positioned for crimes all over the place. This has been a trek because we've had so many people that have gotten involved since then. We've had now 5 universities have gotten involved with different personnel. We've had DNA labs that have stepped up to offer to take it. And so since when we were talking earlier, a lot of the stuff that I couldn't talk about before is we were able to secure DNA from one of the pieces. And it was the neighbors and family members that had come forward in 2014 to 2016. Right by the time that Gary Poste was actually thrown in jail for abuse of his wife, and so the neighbors finally started coming forward to authorities and contacting both California law enforcement to try to say, look, we think there's something about this guy that he could be Zodiac Killer, and that really went nowhere. So we had a local reporter at the time that was in California, Dale Julin. He picked up on it and he started running with the story. And from Dale's perspective, I'm glad he didn't fall into this trap, because there are so many people that get wrapped up into cold cases, or get, especially this one, and gets to the point where it destroys their lives. And Dale, worked this through his retirement, but I talk to Dale every so often. It never destroyed him. It never turned him to alcoholism or anything like that. And
right.
He's been been on the up and up, and he's happily retired now. So we started looking more into it. One of the things that we received was from a family member was a sleeping mat, and the sleeping mat had obviously his DNA, but also other DNA in there. So so you run in again with the scientific problem is how to separate the DNA. Well, with technology, we found a means to be able to separate that out. However, we found the same thing off of several shell casings that we received. I mean, hundreds of shell casings that we received, to include shell casings that would match what we think were the murder weapons, a 9mm Luger and a 22 caliber pistol. So we think, so we received shell casings. Well, we ran DNA off of those, but the degradation after so many decades was just so great that we really never got good feeds on that. And so it's, reset our investigations to take a look at how else we can move forward. Again, still not finding anything that disqualified him. I was like, nope, he's not the guy. It was whoever. We were able to secure DNA from open records of a family member, a blood relative that we were then able to run in the DNA lab through the help of University of Maryland system. I want to make sure I got the right school, but Tom Moriello and his folks at University of Maryland were taking a look at the DNA. So they're able to do a match that says, based upon what we're able to separate the DNA from the sleeping mat, plus what we have from a blood relative, we've been able to determine that we do have a decent sample of Poste DNA that we are now able to share and work with the various law enforcement that have samples of it or have prospects of it. That's in itself is really not much of a story, because it's like, great, you got DNA from somebody that who cares. What had jumped out to us was when we did have a whistleblower from inside the FBI who said that let us know that as of 2016, Gary Francis Poste was their suspect that they were looking at. And again, it wasn't like, no, this was our suspect and we've ruled him out because of X, Y, and Z. That's part has been left open-ended as well. So we're at the point where this, there's not a lot we can do further other than, interviewing more, gathering more circumstantial evidence, things like that to plug the pieces in. But we're at the point where it's, we've been told by several law enforcement folks about behind the scenes, as well as through emails or wherever, that said, look, here's the issue. We get slammed by these cases, this kind of stuff all the time. Conspiracy theorists, documentaries. I mean, every couple of years there's a documentary, and there's a cycle that entertainment industry works on. I was like, look, there was just a Zodiac documentary a year ago. We're not going to do nobody's going to do another one for a couple of years. Let that sink in. It's a reboot. But we're at the point now where it's these local law enforcement is kind of getting overwhelmed with all the amateur sleuths and folks that are coming up with conspiracy theorists and things like that. So you finally have a group that's come forward. I mean, we have 40 professionals involved, from forensic scientists to counterintelligence folks to old gumshoe reporters and former bureau members. It's not just a bunch of yahoos working out of our garages. We have done the rigor of analysis to take a look at this guy. What we're trying to get now is to the point where we can get some cooperation or even some changes on how cold cases are conducted. I.e., we would like for the family members to actually have access to some of their own. If they were the victims, they should have access to cases that have been closed as cold for, several decades, however, what time you want to put on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's back up. So for sure, you nailed the Maryland. It's Tom Moriello from University of Maryland. He is the CSI team chief. So we're talking about, again, legitimate people that are identifying that you have DNA that confirmed by Tom Poste material and his relatives material. Like, this is Tom's DNA, which is one piece of the puzzle. And then we know that the police departments at all have a collection of DNA to include. They've done DNA testing to. It's funny, they did the DNA testing on Arthur Lee Allen, and they said
Yeah.
it's not him that licked the envelope. However, you know,
Right.
you're like,
Right.
okay, well, yeah, you know,
Well,
so and that poor guy had his life partially ruined because
yeah.
of a book and
Right.
what happened to him.
Right. There's the other thing that we're struggling up against is, quite frankly, the cold case industry. And this happened to us on Zodiac. If you've watched the DB Cooper series on Netflix from last year,
Right.
it's a great 4-part series. They did a really professional job talking to us and working with us. But when it came out, I honestly, my wife was ready to throw stuff at the TV because as we were watching all 4 episodes, because the first episode, it talks, they give you the case. The second episode talks about our cold case team, and who we feel obviously very strongly about, who was DB Cooper. But then the next 2 episodes are a bevy of naysayers that they bring on is, these guys don't have the right person because of this one detail, or they don't have the right person because of they messed up on his age or something like that. But when you look at all the folks that they brought up, and they even go to CooperCon, which is held either every year or every other year up in outside of Portland. I'm trying to remember the name of the town, but when you look at these folks and you line up all these naysayers, that's kind of when it hit us, is not till we watched it, was one guy wrote a book about it. One guy runs the DB Cooper podcast. Another guy runs CooperCon. So all of these naysayers they line up have a vested interest in this case never being solved. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, these guys don't have the right person. And the next question is, well, who did it? Well, I don't know. Tune into my podcast and find out. Let's discuss it.
A transsexual lady in Canada. That's who did it.
Right. Well, yeah, it's this Canadian fighter pilot that they then also, a comic book hero or something like that they then brought in the last episode. And that part, we're just, oh my gosh, we're so far off the ranch. It's insane. But think about, Rackstraw, aka DB Cooper, never killed anybody. He hijacked. It's obviously a federal crime. He received close to $250,000 with ransom money, but he never killed anybody. Now we have a case where we think there's up to 10 victims associated with this guy, and the case never being solved. That industry is also huge. I mean, there's all kinds of folks that have a vested interest in this case never being solved. And so you have, besides the folks that legitimately, amateur folks that are just like, look, I really think this is a great topic. I'm just so enthused by it. True crime is one of my passions. I'm going to get into it. I mean, you got those folks that are doing, they're working, themselves on their own hours, that kind of thing. And we're doing this all on our own time as well. Nobody's getting paid for any of this, but then you have these folks. It's like, no, this can't be the thing. This can't be the guy, because I think I know who the guy is. Therefore, I'm going to shoot holes in it. And quite honestly, the internet is perfect for that. But it also lets us get away from true Socratic methods and logic of, let's work through this. Let's go through each of these discussions. Instead, it becomes they don't know what they're talking about. I know by my book type stuff.
The other thing that you get a lot too is people will say things that are just absolutely false. They'll say there's no evidence, and then Erik Kleinsmith would say, no evidence. We've got mountains of evidence, right? Thousands of pieces of evidence.
Right.
Evidence is like, he lived here, right? Okay, that's good. And all these things add up. And as you keep saying, you can't find any way to exclude him. And we're only getting down to, like, does his DNA match with the DNA at the crime scene? Like, that's where we're at. That's how conclusive the evidence is.
Right. I mean, we've gone back. The other cases that we think are involved are cases that took place before the traditional Zodiac killing cases. So we think there was, that he was involved in a murder in 1962, 1963, 62 as a cab driver. 1963 was I think, murder of a couple on a beach. There was 1964 sniper incident of another couple on a beach. And this is very early on, and you look at the MO before, that he was gaining confidence in how to conduct this crime, how to scope out his victims. So that 1966, this one is down in, we think that this was the Riverside case of Sherry Jo Bates down in outside the undergrad library there, where a wristwatch was left with paint spatters on it. And again, Post worked as a painter for 40 years. And then there was also 4 hairs that were not Sherry Jo Bates wrapped around her thumb as part of the attack. Now she was savage, as unfortunately, and as disgusting as, I mean, we talk about this as a kind of a case, or like, as I hate to say it as a game or whatever, but there's some true, horrible aspects to all of this. And that's the worst part about it. But again, we then were able to get a witness that Post admitted to his relatives and his stepson and his friends that his stepson's friends that he was receiving medical treatment for the scar on his forehead and other ailments at March Air Force Base, which was 15 minutes away from there during the same time. So we've never been able to exclude him because of geographic reasons. We've also picked up that there were footprints that were these Air Force Wingwalker boots that were only, at the time, pretty much only used by Air Force or military personnel. The watch that was left at Riverside, local investigation revealed that it was probably bought at a PX or a base PX or exchange locally. And I know Riverside, Riverside police, after receiving a letter that was mailed locally, they firmly believe that their attacker was a local person. But at the same time, we have evidence that has him down at that location, as a local person, to conduct his crime. So.
Yeah, and you're talking about these earlier murders, and hat off to Kleinsmith, who actually identifies some of these people in his book that's also decades old now. But the Gaviota Beach slaying of Linda Edwards and Robert Dominguez. Right. Or Domingos. Right. Yeah, this is one that's like, hey, this looks like it could be him. And so now we're able to say, okay, what evidence remains? Is there DNA there? Can they pull something off? With these letters, we've already known that they've done DNA extraction from the glue on the letters. And so there's quite a bit of stuff that might start to close these things down. Zodiac claims, not hundreds, but dozens of killings over the course of his correspondence. His number kept going up, and some of that probably was apocryphal by him, but we have the ability to maybe close these cases down. And as you say, the amateur sleuths, and shout out to amateur sleuths, because sometimes they're cracking cases or keeping them in the
absolutely
limelight, right?
This was the whole reasons why, one of the visions behind putting the case breakers together is we know that law enforcement is overwhelmed. I mean, a lot of the folks that are on our team came from law enforcement. I mean, from years of my own experience. I mean, there's only so many things that you can handle, and you have to prioritize everything. And just even within the past couple of years, law enforcement stress has I don't think it's ever been greater in the history of our country than the stress that these men and women are receiving now. Not just from the change in how society views them and how the all cops are bad and that kind of garbage that quite honestly I hate that this is even going on. But then also the defund the police, and then just the huge attrition of folks that are law enforcement is saying, forget it. I don't need this. I can I can go sell fishing poles at Cabela's and get a better deal than what I'm getting here. So so what we're running into is cases after cases after cases that go cold. The law enforcement don't have time for that. But there is an entire populace of folks that are poised and ready to do that. I mean, CrimeCon goes on in Vegas every year. 6,000 people show up to this thing. They publish their demographics. It is 85% attendees are female. The average age is 40, and the average household income is $170,000 coming in. And so you have some seasoned folks that again, you from amateurs to is one, having amateurs work on it is one thing, and they're going to give you tips and cues, but ultimately you have to be able to put together teams that can support law enforcement in a legal manner. Chain of custody is going to be a huge deal, and that was a huge deal for us. And that way it's just like, I got his DNA, yeah, but I can solve this case. I've been keeping it in a pickle jar for 20 years, and that kind of thing. It's like, you know what? I'm sorry, we can't use that. I mean, and we've gotten stuff like that coming in. It's just like, look, we got to screen that stuff out. And that's happened on a lot of our different cases, whether it's rack straw, whether it's again, like I mentioned, we've been working on another burial location for Hoffa. I raise my eyebrows on that because I'm very skeptical, but we have good information. But then also working the Atlanta child murders case, and that's the part that jumps out at us is more than anything else is, for Zodiac, there's still 10 living family members for the victims that are still suffering for this. The Atlanta child murders, that was 26 young Black men that were murdered, in 1979, 1980. The guy that was ultimately thrown in jail, Walter Williams, he only was convicted on 2 of those crimes. Once he was convicted, then everybody folded up their tents. When it's like, hey, we solved the case. Well, you got 24 more families sitting out there still suffering over the next decades with no closure for what happened to their child. And that's been, now multiply that by every cold case that's out there that's never been solved. Yeah. So,
and again, like to take a moment to talk about the police role in this, it is very hard to solve a murder. A lot of them go unsolved. It'd be shocking if you knew the numbers of murders that go unsolved. And then you get just past a point of no return where we can't justify spending too much time on Zodiac.
Right.
And certainly not budget resources of money and lab time. There's just too much. Or you're in Groveland, California, which is not anywhere near anything.
Right.
And they have a police department of probably to this day of less than 10 people. Right. And so they aren't all detectives. And so you're like who's going to work this case?
Right. Well, and that's kind of where, I think a lot of folks get hung up on is the cases themselves. We're not doing these cases for fame and fortune. We're really doing these cases to show as professionals a proof of concept of how things can, progress forward, or how cooperation can be conducted between law enforcement and the public to help solve crimes in the future. You see a lot of these cop shows from the 60s and 70s. In fact, there's a great one I got hooked on. I'm trying to remember, but it was one of the ones that took place like 1900s New York, very end of the Victorian age, and it was just the police did their own thing and the populace did their own thing. But now with the tools that are available and out there, you have a wealth of talent that is out, either retired or former or whatever their walk of life, that now have a lot some tools that are generations more advanced than what we've been dealing with in the past, that are now anybody can have access to it. And so being able to conduct investigations, you have. It's not just, I can rely upon a tipster and, let me pass this guy a couple of bucks while he's shining shoes, like in the old gumshoe stories, like, yeah, this guy knows one person or whatever. Now you have somebody's like, look, I got access to a database. I got access to, these different records. I have the ability to take a look at it and survey this scene because, and do my own, analysis. The biggest problem with a case like Post, though, is it is so old that your physical evidence is it's disappeared, and DNA is really the last things that we can rely upon, so, it's not like anything new is going to come out of this. You're basically trying to look for the scraps of history on what you can gather for him.
When you talk about these murders, my hometown, and we've talked about this, my hometown sits on one of the murder sites, and not even 2 miles away is like almost, if it wasn't a little mound of a hill from a golf course, you could see 2 of the sites, right? So this person was in his hunting grounds, and if you drive a little further away, you're in San Francisco or you're in Lake Berryessa, right? So Benicia sits right there. I grew up, my house, beeline distance, if I walked across the hills, I could walk there in half an hour walking over hills, and you can. So it's not far at all. I drive by there all the time. And so you have these scars on the community. I mean, you look at, well, look, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, right? They're out there in the middle of the night, or not the middle of the night, in the evening, late evening, dark evening, because they're going to go make out. You know, David's like excited to honk on some boobs, and he's like, "Yeah, this is awesome." And then the next thing you know, he's murdered, and Betty Lou is murdered, and everything changes.
I think he survived.
No, he's dead. David Faraday died.
Oh no, David Faraday. I'm sorry.
Right.
But
Brian Hartnell and Mike Magoo, those guys survive, and also this ruins their life because everybody. And again, this goes back to the bad side of the cold case amateur folks who are like, "I know who did it," and they just get sick of it, and so they withdraw from society, and they've already, So there's all these things that come in there. So let me back up and just say this. So. You guys have DNA evidence that says this is what Tom Post's DNA looks like, and then now we're hoping that the police departments have done their part and entered the suspect DNA into the registry. Have they all reliably done that? Have they entered this stuff into the database?
Well, yes and no, as far as we can tell. That when he was arraigned, arrested, or sent to jail for his 2016. Stint for his abuse of his wife. I think that was Vallejo. They were supposed to take his DNA and enter it in the FBI's CODIS database, and that didn't happen. And that's one of the things. It's like, you know what? It just things can get sloppy in that regard. But what we're looking at is stuff that's probably been on ice for forever, and that's why it's like our DNA. Is from the blood relative, it obviously is brand spanking new, but the rest of the stuff for him, I mean, he passed away in 2018,
right?
And so you're relying upon stuff that's left behind and other things that were to compare to. That's why this second set of DNA, we really did it to validate, to make sure that what we had was a good set that could be compared.
And let's not take a moment to bash on the Vallejo PD. This is the same PD that a lady was kidnapped and raped, and they went on national TV and said that bitch is lying, and that was not true. So Vallejo PD deserves the knocks that it gets because they do not have enough people to do a good job, and they struggle to maintain law and order in Vallejo. Vallejo is a very risky place. The police cannot respond to all the calls, and we're just talking factual here, right? So when they miss a step or whatever, the last thing they need is more lawsuits and attention. Because they can't afford to have to pay out $2 million every time they open their mouth.
I can only imagine for like Riverside Police, the anything related to the Sherry Joe Bates case is probably under a folder labeled MIGA, which means make it go away.
Yeah.
And it's just for them. Again, my brother's 30 plus years Secret Service. I mean, uniform division. He's been a cop. I mean, I can sympathize with them incredibly that. This is just for them, it's just a major headache. They're at this point, they're now saddled with decades and decades of decisions that have been taking place of let's just put a lid on this and make this go away so we can do our job. That's kind of what so I have all the sympathy in the world. I mean, I had a friend of mine within one of the police departments out in California, basically trying to work with him and talk to him, and I have a tremendous respect for him. But he's like, look, here's the situation. Is most of these police departments will help you solve the case once you've brought the case to them solved.
Yeah.
And when you hit that, it's like, well, God, that makes no sense at all. And then when you look at it, it's like, no, nobody's going to take the risk of more bad publicity of not being able to do it, figure it out again. Or take the time and resources away from what's probably an active case, especially if it's, involving a current missing person or something like that. So, and that's kind of what we're up against. So it's really more of a cultural thing of, look, we're pleading not just for this one case, but we're pleading to have a different view on how, on how investigations are done, especially cold cases where you're not pressed up against time and a lot of the legal factors are no longer in place. As long as everything's done legally, you're not infringing on privacy issues or anything like that. why not look towards this army of amateur sleuths that are sitting out there ready to go?
Yeah, why not? Why not? Why not? Like, at least let them see if they can come up with something.
Right.
The ciphers are cracked by people who weren't paid weren't the police. That's who cracked those things, right?
Right. Exactly.
There's all of this stuff comes with additional evidence from the last time we've talked. The Donna Lass case. Like, we went from nothing on Donna Lass to potentially knowing where she had been since she's been dead. Example. So.
Right.
What do we know about Donna Lass that's grown out of the last couple of years that you can talk about?
That one is unique because it's still suspected that it was him. But we are following at a lead and some evidence that Donna Lass may have known one of Post's family members and may have dated him, and then broke up with them. And so that this may have been much more of a personal retribution thing than anything else, but being able to disappear a body was probably one of Post's fortes, since he was an outdoorsman training his stepson and his posse to do the same things, how to hunt, how to cache your kill so that the bears aren't getting to it, right? Putting it up in the trees, getting up into the wilderness, surviving, up there. So but the one thing that this does do is that this is the first time it crossed state lines, as we get into Nevada. And as soon as it crosses state lines, then all of a sudden your jurisdictions change. The next thing you know, then it becomes, it becomes a requirement for Bureau involvement to look at that. But again, such a long time ago, and still not completely corroborated or connected that it was him, although sending the postcard that says here's where her body is in a cryptic message with looking between the trees,
right?
That's some pretty intimate knowledge of what's there. That does to us, obviously that shows enough connection to link her in.
Yeah, talking about the FBI, when you guys first came out with this big story, thanks for cracking that on the Brick It Down show with me. The FBI did what they're supposed to do. They don't say anything, but it turns out, even at that point, he was their guy.
Right. And I gotta tell you, this is probably the worst week for this story to come out with FBI involvement. Yeah. I mean, they got obviously other things to worry about right now.
They do,
but but there's a huge credibility issue that this hits up against. And that's in my experience working with the Bureau. I mean, everybody that I've ever worked with in the Bureau have been extremely professional folks. I don't think I've run into a single person that has is being described by the way like the Durham report has come out, describing him. I have friends in my neighborhood that are retired Bureau folks. I have other folks,
and they hate that. They don't at all. They don't like any part of that. Like Robin Dreek and I have talked, and he's an FBI counterintelligence guy. And I'm like, how does a lady get away with having TSSCI on her server? And we both shake our heads because we know, but that's what we're talking about. Right. We're talking about. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's why when you get up to there's a lot of folks. I mean, and I made that conscious decision myself, my career of, as you're moving up more up the management chain, you start to say, well, okay, now there's a glass ceiling that I'm going to put in place myself. That quite frankly, I'm just not doing this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I left. Working for a huge contractor, like I was working for Lockheed Martin, running 150 instructors for the Army. Outside of, almost every single instructor outside of Fort Huachuca, I was running as a contractor program, and it was a great career, but quite honestly, it was burnout. But do you want to get it? A lot of folks, and I know a lot of folks I work with now, they get to that stage where they reach that point. It's just like, what? I don't want to do that. I don't need to be on that kind of trajectory now that I'm up in my 50s and that kind of thing. So so everybody that I talk to at my level and even first line supervisors, even some of your managers, they've all been, I've never run into somebody who was not a stand-up person that you couldn't trust. Yeah. However, in the back of what was driving them was this overall culture, and the FBI they have a tough time with other intel agencies because other intel agencies don't like working with them, and it's part of that when we talked about after 9/11 the wall that between law enforcement and intelligence. So intelligence is freely, even like with the Patriot Act, when you read into that, what it does is it allows and strengthens the ability for intelligence to freely share information with law enforcement, but the other direction doesn't exist. And that's by purpose and intent, but that makes its way into individual meetings. So when you're working with somebody with the Bureau, and this happened to us on a Chinese case that we were working on Tech Protect when we were doing our data mining, same thing with the Able Danger. When we were working that, we would meet periodically with somebody from the Bureau, and it would be the same thing would happen in every meeting where it's like, tell me what you got. And so we'd share all our information and say, okay, what do you got? We'll let you know. And then we never see them again. And that's, part of the reason is like they're really not allowed to share a lot of their information because, at the top of their head, they can't tell us whether they've got it through means that we as intel professionals are not able to see. It's like, we got this off of U.S. persons. This is an investigation, yada, yada. You can have it for your intel thing. Actually, no, you can't. That's illegal. So that's the culture that extends into these cold cases as well.
There's quite a bit of other things. This is the problem. Like, it's not a straight line. For example, the weapons cache that's up in the Sierras. First off, very hard to get to. Second, it's been decades, and so the landscape changes. Also, the police department can say, hey, don't go do that because that's an active case. And so you're like, okay, we won't do that. But they're not actually acting on the active case. And then you also have these engagements via email. Yes, let's do this. Yes, let's make progress. Yes, I'm fired up to get this done. And then poof, gone. No interaction. So there's all these starts and stops where you think it's just a matter of like A, B, C, and then solve the case, but it seems like it never happens that way for you guys.
And again, if you're an amateur sleuth, I mean, you're looking at these cases individually. You're just doing it from a pure, of pure forensics or an analytical effort, and that's really, quite honestly, what really gets a lot of folks going. And that's what gets me going. I think that's the fantastic part about it. But as soon as you get into the wider arena, you enter this wicked world of so many intertwined policies, personalities, cultures, and another road, which then constitute a major roadblocks that you have to overcome. I mean, every crime show has the cop it's so stereotypical now. It's like the cop throwing his badge on the desk so he can continue the investigation without the man coming down on him or whatever. But there's some little bit of truth in that, even from our perspective of amateur sleuths, where it's, no, we don't want to talk to you guys, solve the case and then come to us, and then we'll stand side by side with you when you've got irrefutable evidence with no exculpatory mitigating evidence that says that there may be some doubt.
So you've got these different characters. You guys identify them in the press release. I don't necessarily want to get into all the different characters, but there's a number of people where you guys are actively communicating. And again, you guys are acting in good faith, like, hey, we think we can help solve this case if you guys can provide this or whatever. And then you make some traction, and then they invariably seem to disappear. And then there's quite a bit of concern that I got from reading the press release that, again, these departments aren't doing their responsibility, at least here in California, to enter the information into CODIS, which is the database for DNA. What is going on with this? Why are they not doing this? And if it is in CODIS, then what's holding things up?
Well, quite honestly, that's what we don't know the specifics. Each department, whether it's San Francisco, Vallejo, Riverside, I mean, they have their own. I mean, they're obviously their own issues, but but you get to a point where it's, from, again, I have to take their perspective where it's, look, this has just become a major pain in the butt for us. It's, we don't have the time, resources, or effort to go after this. We would rather take bad press for not doing something because we know what we're doing is right in solving these current cases. Honestly, I'd rather take bad press for that than, from a 40-year-old case than somebody saying you're not investigating this child who's currently missing, or you're not investigating something that's actually current or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's tough. I mean, they got a balancing act. I mean, not entering stuff into CODIS, that just, quite honestly, that could be something as ridiculous as a clerical or an admin mistake. We don't know. But having to have different TV shows and documentaries and amateur teams hitting on your email, pounding on your email every day for months, every other month or whatever. You're dealing with it again. Then it becomes standard SOP. Is like, this is how we deal with these guys. Until somebody brings us the case pretty much practically solved, we don't want to divert any resource to hunting this down again.
And just to echo that, and I don't want to be too kind on the police, because they've got a lot of responsibility here to hold up for their lack of performance. And again, sometimes you get a different answer with every person you get to, because no one actually knows the answer. And so you're like, has this been entered in CODIS? Of course it has, and it's like, that's because that's not that they're lying, but why wouldn't we? And then it turns out that, Dina was going to enter it that day, but she had a doctor appointment and it just slipped through the crack, and these things happen. But in the counterintelligence world, you get a crazy walk-in. We always get crazy walk-ins. We all laugh about it. We all talk about it. We all try to give it to the young guy. And, that there's a process for dealing with the crazy people that show in. And it's really easy to dismiss people who maybe aren't crazy because they seem crazy. And so you're just like, we're not going to spend time on this. And you instantly reject that because you've got actual things that are in front of you that aren't crazy enough, but those people are crazy. So we're going to push that aside. So this is a very normal thing in that intelligence and FBI and police world.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about, in general, your confidence in where the case is at. Do you expect that at some point these hairs will be analyzed? I mean, hairs around Mary Jo Bates's thumb, is that conclusive enough to knock this thing out? Or we have the continued thing where, but it's not Gary Post, because I think it's, this person from Grace Smith's book or whatever.
Right. Well, again, it's, and the Sherry Jo Bates crime or her murder, that's only suspected to be part of the Zodiac, so having those hairs not match only disqualifies that case. Doesn't disqualify, the rest of it. It doesn't disqualify our guy overall. I mean, so, again, that's all that one really is doing is like, look, we got the guy for this one murder now, but still you still need to do, your due diligence on all the others. There's some like again, the 1964 sniper shot. That'll never be proven. I mean, that just, God knows, and then the victims know, and now Post knows. I mean, there's there's that kind of diligence that you just can't do, especially with an old case. But for the ones that we do have, we're going to keep pushing until we can, find a way to at least get this stuff confirmed or denied that he was the guy. And you have to have a degree of skepticism. But again, the entire point of us doing this is not to, achieve fame and fortune off of, hey, these guys solve Zodiac or whatever. It's to prove the concept that, every state could have something like this. I mean, we deputized, folks in the past to do amateur work. You can, a smart police department or a smart state police or whatever, a fusion center even, can start to tap into volunteers that follow the rule of law, follow the chain of custody for evidence, follow the standard investigative rules, most probably because most of them have already been trained in it. And they could be retirees that still have the acuity to do investigations, co-opt these folks as opposed to combat these folks. We're not here to combat police and to say, you didn't figure out and we're smarter than you or whatever. Nobody cares about that. We would rather work cooperatively as well as with as I'm sure a lot of amateur sleuths would, to get these cases solved. So the proof of concept is we've already really kind of proven that it works. This is just the we're down to the DNA part. So.
Right. Do you think the DNA will be enough for the zeitgeist to have this thing be solved?
No. Oh God, no.
Okay.
No, I've seen enough of it that it is not going to matter. There is no way to crack into somebody's confirmation bias once they've had years and years and years of working this case. So that, some of these cases take mythical proportions that it's like, it doesn't matter what you do until I die, until I get universal, or I'm the I'm the last Highlander, and I get universal knowledge over the world like the old movie. Until I have that, epiphany or reckoning, there is nothing that, there's some folks that there's nothing you're going to be able to tell them that's ever going to change their minds.
Yeah, this goes back to Graysmith's book. He's so detailed. Then Arthur Lee Allen walks this way down this street, and he sits down.
Right.
And it's so compelling, and he did a great job. And a lot of his work is good. Just like you've heard me say this when I go see a two when I'm deployed. I'm like, how accurate is your intel picture? And if they say anything above 50%, they're full of shit. And so I know like where I'm at with them. Like I put them on the full of shit side. So you have this thing where you have this very compelling case. Even to the point, again, in the early 90s, they do DNA testing and they exclude Arthur Lee Allen from licking the envelopes that he sent. And then so the news is like, that clever man, he knew to have someone else lick his envelope. Come on.
Right.
Come on.
Or use some sort of, wet sponge, which was
the sponge technique. Yeah. So
I mean, again, it's the same thing. And that's what I get, when I talk about intelligence, obviously as my primary job, but when I talk about intelligence, and anytime you hear somebody say, well, I'm working this off of a hunch that this is, X, Y, and Z is true. It's like, what you're telling me is you've done the analysis, but your hunch means you can't articulate why, and you can't share with the rest of us because you don't feel like your thought process would withstand the scrutiny of another person.
Yeah.
So there's, we're really getting into the weeds on analytical rigor and that kind of thing, but that's kind of what it comes down to.
But rigor is rigor, and you have to be rigorous with these things. And you can have a hunch, and that can guide where you go, and maybe your hunch is right, but hunches are wrong way more often than we ever study. I had a hunch, like, oh, that was wrong. You just ignore it, right?
Right.
So you always think you've got an knack, and
right.
You don't.
A hunch is an inarticulated hypothesis. I mean, if you got to put it that way, it's just like, this is kind of what I think. Let me take a look at it. But then you get to the point where you start building that up, and that's what I mean by your real hunch turns into, hey, you know what? I can make money off of this. Therefore, this case must never be solved.
Right. The original person that walks in and helps break this thing for you guys, and they start describing this killing school academy that Post was running. This is among the most damning evidence that there is, where you have these multiple people now that have said, yes, I went through this thing where I was being groomed to be a psychopath or whatever.
Right. I mean, and you see there's a Monty Python skit that I still think is hilarious, where they're interviewing people on the street about, oh, the guy killed this person. It's just like, oh yeah, he was a kind person. I never would have thought. And they find, well, do you think he could do this murder? Oh yeah, he could do it. That's what we had with this guy. We had his neighbors, we had his family members just say, oh yeah, he could be the guy. No question about it. With his daily activity and what he'd been doing. In fact, there's the circumstantial witness or one of the witnesses says, he actually goaded us into shooting at somebody from across this lake up there where they cached the weapons. That kind of thing is what you're looking at. And then the question again is like, why did he stop all of a sudden? Like, well, he got married. His whatever was going on in his mind changed when he suddenly became the stepfather of an adolescent, and then his buddies, and gained control over them, and that filled that fix of whatever he was looking for. Yeah. So a major change in lifestyle.
Yeah, and it could be that his maturation into like full adulthood, and also he recovers from a brain injury. Sure. It could be any number of hunches or hypotheses that you can say. There's reasons why these things happen. It's not common, but you get better from some things.
Right, yeah. And you're doing. You got to do a lot of speculation, and a lot of assessment in there. That it's like, look, a lot of that's not. You get to the point where when you're trying to get into somebody's mind, it's especially somebody who's already passed away. You can't 100% prove any of that.
I know we talked about the team at Maryland that processed the DNA, but you guys definitely dotted your I's and crossed the T's. And again, this is what you guys do. This is why we're talking. You guys are credible. You didn't just go to one lab. You guys cross-validated this several times.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing is, we had several folks that looked at it from different perspectives. We had we had a lab that we're working with that is trying to pioneer the technology to being able to identify multiple strands of DNA within one sample. So if you've got a blood spatter on a crime and it's mixed in with the victims and the perpetrators or whatever, they're cutting edge technology that this group is developing is how to split it out. And one of the things we asked was, how many strands can you split out? And they said, well, we've been successful with 8, all mixed in. It's like, well, why is the number 8 so magical? It's like, because that's the only samples that we had. That's all we just used. That kind of thing. And so there's some really neat things that are going on in that area that we've been able to take advantage of. And again, it's been because of folks that are volunteering their time, their efforts, and some of their own resources to do this. And that's why, again, this is a very slow moving train that's as we move forward.
So when we look at the overall Zodiac case, and we're talking about breaking news, the news essentially is that we've got verifiable evidence back to Gary Poste. Now we just need to close the link between crime scene evidence and this verified Gary Poste DNA. Right. Is that correct?
Right. Or just even have, well, there's 2 things. One, for the case itself, is being able to have, allow these different law enforcement entities to cooperate with us, or let us cooperate with them. Really, is what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. But then again, is more discussions or acknowledgement, or even take this up with lawmakers on being able to build a bridge between this army of amateur and former professional sleuths to law enforcement to support their efforts.
Yeah. The whole thing's a little frustrating when you realize that there's DNA sitting there.
Well,
and I don't know what's left in the Paul Stein case, but I believe there's DNA from that case. You had shell casings from the Benicia murders. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's out there. I mean, I don't know what he left on the scene at Berryessa, but again, there's so much stuff that was gathered. Like he left rope, obviously, right? So his DNA is on that rope, potentially still after all these decades.
Right. And that's where you get the Berryessa was the boot prints. Paul Stein was the swatch of his shirt that was mailed in.
And a bloody palm print.
Right.
In the cab.
Right. Yeah. There's pieces. I mean, they didn't do it haphazardly for any of these crimes. And even back then, it's just now we have the ability to look at this data in a different way, through forensics, through data, and through, anybody who's watched a bunch of CSI shows know that most of this stuff is possible. Not all of it, but most of it is possible.
Yeah. What else do we need to cover? Is there any other aspect of this you want to talk about? Your guys' informants at all, or
no? Actually, no, not at all.
Specifically about them, but the quality and the grade.
I have trust in both the FBI whistleblower who's remaining anonymous for now, as well as the former Army counter intel guy that we tapped into that was able to obtain the DNA just through public means. I have implicit trust in these guys. Whistleblowing is a tough thing. I mean, obviously I know from getting dragged up in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, House Armed Service Committee, testifying twice. It was that is a tough road to be on. I got the point. I actually published an article on it's called Whistleblower Rules, and the things that you need to follow as a whistleblower going forward. And there's a huge difference between whistleblower and the leakers. And these leakers, I think the latest guy was this 21-year-old guardsman who was putting classified information about Ukraine out onto his gaming chat site to impress his buddies. I mean, there's a world difference between him and the guy who wrote the Pentagon Papers, or Snowden or whoever. I mean, there's really no pattern to leakers, but for whistleblowers, there are some things that you really do need to follow. And one of the biggest things is that to remember for anybody is that the credibility of that person as a whistleblower is the most important thing of anything that they are bringing forward, as if they are doing that. And that was one of the things that I kept in mind as I had to go, besides doing the testimony, in public. I mean, I've had to do meetings after meetings after meetings with different investigators, the DOD Inspector General, several hours with them, several hours on the Hill. In fact, when Chief Justice Roberts was having his Senate hearing for his approvals, if you look at the wall that all the senators are sitting right behind that wall, I was sitting there in the room behind them for hours at the exact same time doing my testimony in a classified room about all the things that we were doing on the Able Danger and hunting Al Qaeda before 9/11. And the first word I got back from a friend of mine who was a staffer for one of the senators was, "You did great. You're one of the only trusted sources in this entire episode, you and another guy, and it's because you don't have an axe to grind. You don't have you don't have anything that you're asking for to benefit from it, that kind of thing." So
I was just going to say, what a lot of times when you do these things, you're not doing this for your own benefit. Matter of fact, you're doing it in your own detriment, because there's it's just all character. It's all like, this has to change, and it's going to cost me my house, maybe my marriage, but it has to change.
Right. And I know I heard you just say that, but quite honestly, there are a lot of folks who are doing this who do whistleblowing for their own benefit, and that gets found out very quickly. In fact, I had to talk to at the time a guy named Russ Caso. He was Congressman Kurt Weldon's chief of staff. He was like, "Hey, let's go meet." So we met at a hotel restaurant near the house. It was like a Sunday morning. And he goes, "Look, I'm going to bring a lawyer with me." I was like, "Yeah, no problem." I don't have any worries about talking to a lawyer. Well, the lawyer shows up, and it's Jim Woolsey, former director of CIA. I was like, "You're the lawyer." He's like, "Well, I'm retired now, but but I work for I'm on a $1 retainer or something like that." Well, one of the things that through that whole interview process, one of the things I asked at the very end is like, "Okay, so what do you want?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? What do you want?" He said, "Well, what do you want for your testimony?" And I was like, "Well, what is everybody else asking?" And it's they're telling me about, well, this person wants a promotion, this person wants to be moved over into an SES level position. Everybody wants something. So what do you want? I was like, I want these guys dead, killed, or captured, so they don't do this again. And I want for the safety of my own children. Yeah. Can you guarantee that for me? And I tell this story over and over for folks that are thinking about doing whistleblowing, and I've counseled a couple of folks that are friends of mine that have done it, and they just said, "Look," and that's when I got a handshake from Woolsey. He just said, "You're the only person that we've talked to so far that has not had an axe to grind or looking at this as a self-promoting piece." And that's really, in our whistleblower case, we're made up of a group of 40 some folks who are pretty much from that same cut. We do this because it's the hard thing to do. We do this because we like doing this, and this is our, so for a lot of us, this is our call.
Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up? And thanks again for coming on. It's always great to see you and talk, but also just because my own personal connection to the Zodiac Killer case, it's a big deal.
No, I mean, we're good. I mean, you're going to see stuff coming out in the news. There'll probably be some other interviews, things like that. But quite honestly, it's at the point where we've moved this story forward enough to the point where without a lot of big changes of cooperation, there's still stuff that we are working on the side. But as it comes out, I'll let you know.
Yeah. So just so everybody to know, like, what basically the case breakers have put the ball squarely in the FBI and the local PD's court, and all they've got to do is take a swing and hit it back. And a lot of them have this stuff in they all have it all in their evidence locker, and so it's a matter of processing it.
Take a look at this not only from this single crime, but take a look at this as a proof of concept. This does work. Yeah. And this can work for police departments in the future.
Stand by.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours